I'm really excited to have a former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, joining us because I wanted to get his insight into everything that happened over the weekend. Secretary Pompeo, we saw the Wagner Group march on Moscow, then abruptly abandoned their march on Moscow with a deal that allowed the head of the Wagner Group to go to Belarus. It was supposedly brokered by Lukashenko of Belarus, which had people kind of scratch their heads at how does he kind of have this much power to broker anything with Putin on his own. So looking at this with your background, what was going through your mind when this all started unfolding? It was very quick over the weekend.
Jordan, it's great to be with you again today. You know, when I first saw Prigozhin start to move, it reminded me of my time when I was in the administration, and Prigozhin's forces in Syria started to move against the Americans, and we killed some 300 of the Wagner soldiers that day. And we thought it was irrational, right? It was in Syria, he was crossing the river. He knew we had to know. And I remember thinking when Prigozhin's forces were on the move, you could watch it on TV, thinking he's made a mistake again, right? There's very unlikely that forces are going to gather, permitting him to take Vladimir Putin out, or for that matter, even to gain leverage to get rid of his nemesis, the Ministry of Defense leader Shoigu and Gerasimov. And so I remember thinking this is almost certainly to end badly for Prigozhin and his forces. And of course, within, 30 hours or so, they turned around. Prigozhin's now telling a story. I think there's still a lot we don't know, but I don't think there's any doubt that Prigozhin viewed himself as having crawled too far out on the limb, kind of in the same way some of the Chinese business leaders did. And Putin was attempting to rein him back in, and he saw this as his last-ditch effort to protect himself. And of course, it didn't end that way.
Mike, I always look at these things, and we've done a lot of work in Russia. We had an office in Moscow on religious liberty issues throughout the entire country in the former Soviet bloc. I mean, our lawyers there litigated cases at the European courts on religious liberty and religious freedom and did a great job. Of course, we can't do that now with the sanctions in place. But I was going to ask you this question. I always look at the Russian situation, and you got to think it's like the Middle East. You got to think nine-dimensionally. It's like a nine-dimensional chess game. It's hard for me to believe that Putin didn't know a lot of this was happening and that he may have been moving the players around here a bit. Could this be an exit or attempted exit ramp out of Ukraine? Because now he's got the Wagner troops allegedly not willing to fight, and he's got a domestic situation, and he says, you know what, I got to concentrate on home. I'm total speculation on my part.
Jay, your point about the fact that we should all be quite humble in believing we actually know what's going on inside the Russian leadership circles is precisely right. Jay, I think it's unlikely that Putin's viewing this as his exit. In some ways, that would be just a glorious outcome, right? A Ukrainian success story there would be a fantastic outcome without the use of nuclear weapons, without American soldiers. That'd be fantastic. I think more likely is that Putin actually believes that he now has to tighten down things inside his own country even more, but has to keep the failed mission in Ukraine alive, or there's too much confidence lost in him. So my guess is you'll see more tanks inside of Russia. You'll see bigger domestic security forces, and you will see a continued effort to mobilize even more Russians in the fight in Ukraine. This is a dangerous place for Putin to go, but his desire to stay in power has, as you know, Jay, that's always the rule number one: keep the guy in charge. And I think you'll see him clamp down at home and continue to try and exert his capacity to at least tell the story of continued fighting in Ukraine. So I'm hopeful the Ukrainians will see the opportunity here and be able to make gains, further putting pressure on Vladimir Putin.
We know, for instance, the Wagner troops are in Haiti. We know they're on the continent of Africa. They've been deployed, as you said, in Syria. The lack of their ability to be deployed now in the Ukraine situation with Russia, in that conflict, what does that do for Putin or do to Putin?
It's hard to know. We hear conflicting stories about where these soldiers have heard different numbers. So it sounds like somewhere in the range of 25,000 or 30,000 where they're going to go. And remember this too, though, Jay, that the logistics and the money were all coming from the Kremlin. So Putin always had an enormous amount of leverage on Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner. Prigozhin had some leverage too, and he tried to exert it. But in the end, money matters, logistics matter. Prigozhin was clearly being pushed in ways that he didn't want to be pushed, and now he's been exiled. We'll have to see where the troops all land, but make no mistake about it, there will still be private Russian forces, whether they go under the name Wagner Force. Putin will still see that as a global instrument of power, and he'll find someone who he trusts for a period of time to go lead those forces wherever he needs them to keep Russian influence strong around the world.
I want to go to your new piece up at ACLJ.org, and we'll keep following, of course, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine very closely with this as it all continues to unfold day by day and minute by minute. But you have a new piece up at ACLJ.org that Biden's sanction relief for the Iranian regime will fuel murder, mayhem, and terror. This might actually surprise people, but we now know that the U.S. and Iran have re-entered indirect talks to try and come up with another or get back into the nuclear deal, of course, getting close to election time as well.
It's incomprehensible to me that this is just the zombie thing that won't go away. You know, there may be some politics in this. This could be the Biden administration looking for a win, a story to tell the American people about a foreign success. I think that dog won't hunt, but it may be they believe it. I think more likely they've always had this ideological view, this almost religious fanaticism that says we need to cut a deal with the Iranians to keep peace in the Middle East. We proved, Jordan, that wasn't true. When the Abraham Accords came into being, we proved that supporting our Sunni friends, the Gulf state friends, our Shia friends around the world who wanted peace and not terror like the Ayatollah does. And, you know, all of this taking place against a backdrop of Iranian weapons being handed, sold, traded to the Russians to kill Ukrainian kids while we're in that fight too. It makes no sense as a matter of logic to me, but it is very clear the Biden administration remains intent on some kind of deal which will enrich the Ayatollah and create enormous risk for the United States and for our ally and friend Israel as well.
More about that in the weeks ahead, and look forward to your continued comments and appreciate your work with us and your work around the globe. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate it.